The wind howling across the rooftop of the towering commercial building was deafening, yet it couldn't drown out the ringing in Izuku Midoriya's ears. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to consider what's realistic, young man. The words hung in the air long after the symbol of peace had departed. The rooftop door had clicked shut with a sickening finality, leaving Izuku alone under a bruised, twilight sky. The city of Muzurifu sprawled out below him, a glittering tapestry of neon lights, rushing cars, and millions of people living their lives. Millions of people, 80% of whom possessed a genetic miracle that elevated them above the mundane. Izuku stared at his trembling hands. They were covered in pale, faint scars from years of explosive burns, souvenirs from Katsuki Bakugo. Souvenirs of his own inadequacy. If you want a quirk so badly, there might be another way. Take a swan dive off the roof of the building and pray for a quirk in your next life. Bakugo's cruel laughter echoed in his memory, blending with All Might's somber, pitying gaze. The two pillars of Izuku's world, his childhood friend and his lifelong idol, had independently come to the exact same conclusion. Izuku Midoriya was useless. He was a relic. He was a quirkless nobody in a society of gods and monsters, and there was no place for him. His knees buckled. Izuku collapsed onto the cold, hard concrete of the roof, his yellow backpack spilling open. His hero analysis notebook, charred, waterlogged, and now entirely meaningless, slid out across the roof. He didn't reach for it. For the first time in his 14 years of life, the burning, desperate fire in Izuku Midoriya's chest went out. He didn't cry. He was too hollowed out for tears. Slowly, agonizingly, he pushed himself off the ground. He didn't look over the edge of the roof. The thought terrified him, not because he was afraid of heights, but because in this moment of absolute emptiness, the abyss looked uncomfortably inviting. Instead, he turned around, walked down the dark stairwell, and exited the building. He didn't know where he was walking. His feet carried him away from the bustling commercial district, away from the police sirens and the flashing lights of pro-heroes subduing petty villains. He walked for what felt like hours. The pristine streets of downtown Muzurifu gradually gave way to cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, and the rusting husks of abandoned factories. This was the underbelly of the city, a forgotten industrial zone that had been left to rot when modern hero society centralized its wealth. Izuku didn't care. He was a ghost haunting a graveyard of metal and concrete. His eyes were wide, glassy, and unblinking, fixed on the pavement ahead. Well, look what wandered out of the nice part of town. The voice was grating, thick with malice and the scratchy cadence of someone who smoked too much. Izuku blinked, his surroundings finally registering. He had wandered into a dead-end alleyway between two dilapidated warehouses. The only light came from a single, sickly yellow bulb buzzing above a rusted fire door. Blocking the exit were three men. The one who had spoken was tall, dangerously thin, with skin that looked like it was made of gray, cracked slate. His quirk, obviously. To his left was a squat, heavily muscled man whose jaw unhinged slightly, dripping a sizzling, acidic saliva onto the concrete. The third man hung back in the shadows, his fingers elongating into sharp, bone-like metallic spikes. Kid looks lost, the acidic one chuckled, a wet, repulsive sound. Look at the uniform. Aldera Junior High. Nice threads. Probably got a nice wallet, too. Izuku stopped. He looked at the three men. His analytical mind, trained over years of obsessive observation, immediately categorized their physical traits, assessing their likely quirks, estimating their range and combat capabilities. The slate-skinned man was the tank, probably resistant to blunt force. The acid ruler was mid-range, highly lethal. The spike-fingered man was a stealth striker. Normally Izuku would be terrified. He would be frantically backing away, apologizing, looking for an escape route. Tonight, he just felt tired. Take a swan dive, be realistic. Izuku stood entirely still. He didn't drop his backpack. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked at them with dead, emerald eyes. Hey, the slate-skinned man barked, stepping forward, his rocky fists clenching. Are you deaf, kid? Toss the bag. Empty your pockets. And maybe we won't break your legs. Go ahead, Izuku thought numbly. Break them. It doesn't matter anyway. I don't have any money, Izuku said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual nervous tremor. The men exchanged a look, surprised by the lack of fear. It only seemed to anger the leader. Tough guy, huh? Must think you've got a hotshot quirk. Let's see how hot you are when I cave your teeth in. The slate-skinned man lunged. He was surprisingly fast for his size, his heavy stone fist pulling back for a devastating haymaker aimed directly at Izuku's face. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't close his eyes. He just watched the fist come, accepting the punishment the universe had decided he deserved. Honestly, the trash in this city just gets louder and louder. The voice was incongruous with the setting. It was the raspy, trembling voice of a fragile old woman. Before the stone fist could connect with Izuku's face, a blur of motion intercepted the attack. A figure had stepped between Izuku and the thug. It was an elderly woman, heavily cloaked in a tattered brown shawl, her back severely hunched. She looked like she weighed less than 100 pounds, yet she had caught the slate-skinned man's punch with a single, withered hand. The thug's eyes bugged out. What the? Let go of me, you old hag! He pulled, but his arm was completely immobilized, locked in the old woman's grip as if caught in a titanium vice. Manners, the old woman tooted. She didn't punch him. She didn't even seem to move. But suddenly, there was a sound like a thunderclap in the narrow alley. The slate-skinned man was violently launched backward, his feet leaving the ground entirely. He flew through the air, crashing into the brick wall of the alley with enough force to crater the masonry. He slumped to the ground, out cold, the slate armor on his chest completely spiderwebbed with cracks. Izuku gasped, his breath hitching. What was that? He hadn't seen her strike. He hadn't seen an activation of a quirk. There was no wind, no flash of light, no shift in mass. Just pure, concussive force. Boss! The acid-drooling man yelled. He turned his furious gaze on the old woman. You're dead, Granny! He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, and spat a massive glob of violently bubbling green acid. It sailed through the air, aimed squarely at the old woman's back. Watch out! Izuku screamed, his heroic instincts finally overriding his depression. The old woman didn't turn around. She simply raised 2 fingers over her shoulder. Suddenly, the air around her seemed to warp. Izuku could only describe it as a heat mirage, a shimmering distortion in the space behind her. The glob of acid hit the distortion and simply stopped in midair, splashing against an invisible, spherical barrier. It sizzled uselessly before dripping down onto the asphalt, burning holes into the ground, a full foot away from her cloak. The third thug, the one with metallic spike fingers, panicked. He bolted from the shadows, aiming to skewer her from the side. The old woman sighed. She moved her foot, tapping the heel of her worn shoe against the pavement. To Izuku's supernatural shock, a wave of pressure washed over the alley. It wasn't a physical wind. It was a suffocating, terrifying gravity that seemed to press directly against Izuku's soul. The air turned freezing cold, yet sweat beaded instantly on Izuku's forehead. His knees knocked together, every biological alarm bell in his brain screaming at him to run, to flee from an apex predator. The spike-fingered man hit the invisible wave of pressure and completely froze. His eyes rolled back in his head, foam bubbling at the corners of his mouth, and he collapsed onto his face, completely unconscious, overwhelmed by pure terror. The acid drooler took one look at his fallen comrades, felt the horrifying pressure in the air, and ran out of the alley screaming. Silence descended. The suffocating pressure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Izuku gasping for breath, clutching his chest. The hunched old woman stood amidst the unconscious bodies. Slowly, she turned around to face Izuku. Under the caul of her cloak, her eyes were sharp, bright, and utterly piercing. Are you an idiot, boy? She asked. Her voice was no longer the trembling rasp of an elder. It was sharp, authoritative, and vibrated with an underlying power. If I hadn't stepped in, you would have let him shatter your skull. Izuku swallowed hard, taking a step back. I watched you, she interrupted, taking a step forward. Her posture began to change. The severe hunch in her back straightened. The illusion of frailty melted away. She reached up and pulled back the caul of her cloak. Izuku's jaw dropped. The person beneath the cloak wasn't an old woman at all. It was a young girl, perhaps in her late teens, with blonde hair tied back into twin pigtails, wearing a frilly, slightly archaic pink dress underneath the oversized cloak. She possessed porcelain skin, bright blue eyes, and an expression of profound irritation. "You," the girl pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his chest. "You have the eyes of a dead fish. A complete lack of self-preservation. Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you use your quirk?" The word snapped Izuku out of his shock. The dull ache in his chest flared back to life. He looked down at his ruined red sneakers. "I don't have one," Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm quirkless." The blonde girl paused. She tilted her head, her blue eyes narrowing. She stepped closer to him, invading his personal space. Izuku felt incredibly small, even though he was technically taller than her current form. "Quirkless," she repeated, tasting the word. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Izuku said softly, the tears finally welling up in his eyes. The dam broke. Everything from the day poured out in a pathetic, trembling rush. "I have an extra joint in my pinky toe. It's proof. I'm an evolutionary dead end. I just wanted to be a hero who saves people with a smile. But everyone told me I can't. Kaken, my mom, even All Might. They all said it's impossible. Without a quirk I'm just useless." He clamped his hands over his eyes, sobbing quietly into the dark alleyway, ashamed of his weakness but unable to stop it. He expected her to laugh. He expected her to tell him to go home, to give up. Instead, a warm, soft hand rested on top of his messy green hair. Izuku sniffled, looking up through his fingers. The blonde girl was looking at him, but there was no pity in her eyes. There was a profound, calculating interest, and a strange, maternal warmth. "What is your name, boy?" she asked gently. "Izuku. Izuku Midoriya." "Well, Izuku Midoriya. My name is Biscuit Kruger. I am a pro hunter. Though in this world, I suppose nobody knows what that means." Izuku blinked through his tears. "This world?" Biscuit sighed, crossing her arms. "I am not from here. I've been stuck in this bizarre, mutated dimension for over 40 years. When I arrived, I was baffled by what humanity had become. People shooting fire from their mouths, growing extra limbs, manipulating gravity. At first, I thought they were all exceptionally gifted users. None? Izuku repeated, his analytical mind latching onto the unknown term. Is that your quirk? The invisible barrier? The concussive blasts? Biscuit chuckled, a surprisingly youthful sound. No, Izuku. Quirks are a biological anomaly. A localized genetic mutation that hijacked the natural evolution of humanity. You see, every living creature possesses life energy. Aura. In my world, we learned to harness this energy. We call it Nin, but when the quirk factor mutated into humanity's genetic code, it fundamentally altered your biology. She paced around him, her eyes scanning his body as if reading a book only she could see. To fuel a quirk, the human body needs an immense amount of energy. So, evolution took a shortcut. It permanently sealed the aura nodes, the pores in the body that released life energy, and funneled all of that ambient aura directly into the quirk factor. Your people traded the infinite versatility of the soul for a single, specialized party trick. Izuku's mind raced. He had studied quirk biology for years, read countless medical journals on quirk evolution and the quirk singularity theory. What she was saying completely rewrote the foundation of modern superhuman biology. If the nodes are sealed to power the quirk. Izuku breathed, his emerald eyes widening as the logic pieced itself together. Biscuit stopped in front of him, a wide, predatory grin spreading across her face. Exactly, my smart little fish. You lack the quirk factor. You have the extra toe joint. You possess the original, uncorrupted blueprint of humanity. Your aura nodes aren't sealed shut by genetic mutation, Izuku. They are merely dormant. The silence in the alley was deafening. Izuku's heart began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. You mean? Izuku stammered, his hands shaking wildly. You mean I have power? I could have a quirk? Not a quirk, Biscuit corrected sharply. Something far older, far deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. A quirk is a tool you are born with. Nin is a reflection of your very soul. It is your willpower, your desires, your intelligence, and your life force weaponized. She took a step back, her expression turning deadly serious. I have watched this society for 40 years. I have watched heroes parade around, relying entirely on their genetic lottery, neglecting the fundamental mastery of their own bodies. It sickens me. But you have the drive. I saw you try to warn me about the acid, even when you thought I was a helpless old woman, even when you had given up on your own life. Biscuit held out her hand. I can open your nodes, Izuku Midoriya. I can teach you the art of Nin. But be warned, once your nodes are open, your life energy will pour out of you. If you lack the willpower to contain it, you will wither away and die of exhaustion in minutes. It is a path of absolute hellish agony, relentless training, and deadly consequence. But if you survive it, you will possess a power that makes these heroes look like children playing dress-up. Izuku stared at her extended hand. His mind flashed back to the rooftop. All Might's deflating form. The pity in his sunken eyes. Be realistic. He thought of Kaken's explosions, the burns on his shoulders, the mocking laughter of his classmates. He thought of the innocent people he had always wanted to save, the terrified faces he wanted to reassure with a fearless smile. He didn't have a quirk. The universe had denied him the right to stand on the starting line. But here, in a dark, stinking alleyway, an alien from another dimension was offering him a backdoor into the realm of gods. Izuku didn't hesitate. He reached out and grabbed Biscuit's hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. Teach me, Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave, the dead fish look in his eyes instantly replaced by a burning, incandescent green fire. I'll do whatever it takes. I don't care if it kills me. I will be a hero. Biscuit Kruger smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Good answer. Now take off your jacket and your shirt, turn around, and sit cross-legged on the ground. Izuku complied quickly, stripping off his Gakurin uniform jacket and his white undershirt. The cool night air raised goosebumps on his pale, scrawny skin. He sat on the asphalt, his back facing Biscuit. Normally, awakening Nin is a slow process of meditation that takes months, Biscuit explained, her voice dropping into a rhythmic, almost hypnotic cadence. But you don't have months. I am going to use a method called initiation. I will send my aura into your body to force your aura nodes open all at once. It will feel like you are being electrocuted and dipped in boiling water simultaneously. Do not move. Do not scream. If you lose focus, you die. Izuku gulped, nodding stiffly. Understood. Close your eyes. Focus on your breathing. Izuku closed his eyes. He listened to the distant sound of traffic, the hum of the yellow light bulb overhead, his own heartbeat. Then, he felt her hands press flat against the center of his bare back. At first, it was just a physical touch. But then, a sensation completely alien to human experience flooded his nervous system. It felt like hot, liquid gold was being injected directly into his spine. It was a suffocating pressure, a dense, heavy heat that bypassed his skin and sank directly into his bones. No! Biscuit commanded. A pulse of unimaginable force blasted from her palms. Izuku's eyes snapped open, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. A silent scream tore at his throat, but he bit his lip so hard it bled, refusing to make a sound. It felt as though every single pore on his body had been ripped open with a hot iron. The sensation of self suddenly expanded. He could feel something flowing out of him, a rushing river of heat, vitality, and raw emotion. It was pouring out of his head, his shoulders, his arms, his chest. It was pouring out of him like blood from a severed artery. Your nodes are open. Biscuit shouted over a sudden, rushing wind. Look at it, Izuku. Look at your aura. Izuku looked down at his hands. He gasped. Shimmering around his skin was a thick, viscous, luminescent green vapor. It looked like steam, but it was heavy, glowing with an intense, emerald light. And there was so much of it. It wasn't just hovering over his skin. It was erupting from him like a geyser. The sheer volume of the green energy was staggering, rising 10 feet into the air, swirling like a localized hurricane. The wind in the alley picked up to gale-force speeds. Loose trash, broken glass, and gravel were swept up into the miniature tornado of Izuku's life force. The brick walls of the alley began to groan under the sheer ambient pressure. Biscuit took a step back, shielding her eyes from the blinding green light. Her jaw dropped slightly. What is this volume? She thought, utterly stunned. I expected a trickle. A small flame. But this is a forest fire. His aura reserves are monstrous. Is it because his nodes have been forcefully dormant for 14 years, building up pressure like a dam? No, it's more than that. The sheer density of his life force. This boy's spirit is impossibly heavy. Izuku! Biscuit yelled, snapping out of her shock. You are bleeding out your life energy. If you let it all escape, you will collapse. You must close the circuit. Izuku couldn't hear her perfectly over the roar of his own aura, but he felt the terrifying drain. He felt lightheaded. His vision was blurring at the edges. The intense heat of the green vapor was starting to feel cold. He was dying. Listen to me, Biscuit commanded, projecting her voice using her own nin. Imagine the energy is blood. You are holding it in. Envision a shroud wrapping around your body. Bind the flow. Keep it swirling around you, but do not let it escape into the air. This is 10. Bind it, Izuku thought frantically. A shroud. He focused. He ignored the pain, the cold, the sheer panic of impending death. He clamped down on his mind, visualizing his incredibly detailed hero notebooks. He visualized the binding tape of Eraserhead. He visualized the skin-tight suit. He imagined the green vapor hitting an invisible wall just inches from his skin and bouncing back inward. Stay inside. He mentally screamed. Slowly, agonizingly, the raging geyser of green vapor began to condense. The 10-foot-high pillar of aura sank down. The howling wind in the alley began to die. Izuku gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face, his veins popping under his skin. He forced the energy to compress. Thwump. The erratic vapor snapped into place. Izuku fell forward onto his hands and knees, panting heavily, gasping for air as if he had just sprinted a marathon. But he didn't feel weak anymore. He looked down at his arms. A perfectly smooth, tranquil layer of glowing green energy was flowing around his skin, like a second layer of clothing made of pure, warm light. It moved gracefully, flowing up his arms, over his shoulders, and down his back in a continuous, perfect loop. He felt incredible. The cold night air no longer bothered him. The fatigue from his miserable day was completely gone. His body felt light, yet filled with explosive, boundless power. He felt entirely, intimately connected to every muscle, tendon, and bone in his body. He felt more alive in this single moment than he had in 14 years. Biscuit walked over and knelt beside him. She reached out and touched the tranquil green aura surrounding him. Perfect, she murmured, genuine awe in her voice. To establish 10 on your very first try, under the duress of a forced awakening, your mental fortitude is terrifying, Izuku. Izuku slowly pushed himself up to a kneeling position, staring at his glowing green hands. This is my nin? This is my soul? Yes, Biscuit said, standing up and placing her hands on her hips. What you are doing right now is 10, the first major principle of nin. It creates a shroud of aura that defends against basic physical and emotional attacks. It also severely slows down your body's aging process, as your life energy is no longer leaking away. Izuku looked up at her, the glowing green aura illuminating his tear-stained, awestruck face. I can be a hero with this. You can be much more than a hero, Biscuit said, her blue eyes flashing with excitement. But only if you survive my training. The UA entrance exam. I assume that is your goal? Izuku nodded rapidly. It's in exactly 10 months. 10 months, Biscuit mused, tapping her chin. For a normal person, mastering the basics of nin takes years. But you are not normal. That ocean of aura you just displayed proves it. 10 months is enough time to forge you into an absolute monster. She pointed her finger at him, her expression hardening into the terrifying visage of a true master. Starting tomorrow, your life belongs to me, Izuku Midoriya. We will break your body down and rebuild it with aura. You will learn 10, Zetsu Run and Hatsu. You will learn to manipulate your aura to reinforce your strikes, heal your wounds, and shatter steel. You will not have time to sleep. You will not have time to cry. Are you prepared for hell? Izuku stood up. He didn't bother putting his shirt back on yet. He just stood there, clad in the emerald light of his own awakened soul, standing tall amidst the unconscious bodies of the thugs who had tried to break him. The timid, stuttering, quirkless boy who had walked onto that rooftop earlier today was dead. In his place stood an anomaly. A ghost of the old world armed with the ultimate power of the soul. Izuku looked Biscuit dead in the eyes and bowed deeply. Please take care of me, Master Kruger. Biscuit grinned, revealing a hint of something incredibly dangerous. Oh, I will. Tomorrow at 5 a.m., Dagoba Municipal Beach. Do not be late. As she turned and walked away, her form blurring and vanishing into the shadows of the city with impossible speed, Izuku stood alone in the alleyway. He unclenched his fist. The green aura flared slightly, responding to his thoughts, his emotions, his absolute resolve. He didn't need a quirk. He didn't need a genetic lottery. He had something better. I'm coming, Kaken, Izuku thought, a confident, serene smile finally breaking across his face. I'm going to save everyone. And I'm going to show the whole world what a quirkless hero can do. The sun had barely begun to paint the horizon in streaks of violet and bruised orange when Izuku arrived at Dagoba Municipal Beach. Or rather, what used to be a beach. The entire coastline was a sprawling, towering monument to human waste. Mountains of rusted refrigerators, crushed cars, broken washing machines, and discarded tires choked the sand, piling up 20 feet high in some places. The smell of rust, salt, and rotting seaweed was oppressive. Izuku stood at the edge of the seawall, wearing a simple white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his backpack slung over his shoulder. The green aura of his 10 was suppressed right now. Biscuit had sent him a brief text message from an unknown number on his walk over, instructing him to keep his aura strictly internalized to avoid drawing the attention of pro-heroes or police. Hide your fangs until it's time to bite. The message had read, You're 5 minutes early, a voice called out from the top of a massive pile of microwaves. Izuku looked up to see Biscuit sitting cross-legged on a rusted washing machine, reading a fashion magazine. She casually tossed the magazine aside and leapt down, floating through the air with a feather-light grace that defied gravity, landing softly on the sand in front of him. Good. Punctuality is the first sign of discipline, Biscuit said, looking him up and down. How did you sleep? I didn't, Izuku admitted truthfully. His mind had been racing too fast. He had spent the entire night analyzing his body, feeling the warm, thrumming current of energy flowing through his veins. He had experimented in his room, finding that if he concentrated hard enough, he could increase the flow of energy to his hand, making it glow slightly beneath his skin. I figured, Biscuit scoffed. First times always give you a high. But today, the honeymoon ends. Look at this beach. Izuku scanned the mountains of trash. It's a dumping ground. The ocean currents bring the trash in, and people illegally dump their appliances here. A perfect training ground, Biscuit smiled. Your physical body is incredibly weak, Izuku. Nin is fueled by life energy, which is intrinsically tied to your physical stamina and biological health. A weak vessel cannot hold a vast ocean of aura for long without cracking. If you want to use advanced Nin techniques without tearing your muscles to shreds, your body needs to be a fortress. She pointed to a particularly massive pile of trash, topped with an entire rusted-out pickup truck. Over the next 10 months, you are going to clear this entire beach. With your bare hands. Izuku's eyes widened. The whole thing? That's thousands of tons of metal. Did I stutter? Biscuit snapped. But you won't just be lifting weights, Izuku. Anyone can lift weights. You are going to use this trash to master the 4 major principles of Nin simultaneously. She raised one finger. First 10. As you work, you will maintain a steady, unbreakable shroud of aura. This will increase your stamina and protect your skin from the jagged metal and tetanus. If your 10 drops for even a second, you will bleed. She raised a second finger. Second Zetsu. The art of completely shutting off your aura nodes. When you take your 5-minute breaks, you will use Zetsu to completely mask your presence and accelerate your body's natural recovery. It is the absolute silence of the soul. She raised a third finger. Third Run. The explosive release of aura. When you encounter an object too heavy for your physical muscles, like that truck, you will use Ren to flood your body with immense power, enhancing your physical strength to superhuman levels. But be warned, Ren drains your stamina exponentially. You must learn to turn it on and off in a fraction of a second. She raised a fourth, final finger. And finally, Hatsu. The personal expression of your Nen. We will not focus on this until your foundation is absolute. Hatsu is what makes you unique, but until you master the first three, your Hatsu would be useless. Izuku nodded, his mind absorbing the information like a sponge. 10 for defense and stamina. Zetsu for stealth and recovery. Ren for explosive offense and strength. Hatsu for specialized abilities. It made perfect sense. It was a holistic, entirely self-contained system of combat that didn't rely on random genetic luck. I understand, Izuku said firmly, dropping his backpack onto the sand. Let's see it then, Biscuit challenged. Show me your Ren. I want to see the maximum output of your aura. Izuku closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, reaching deep into his core. He remembered the feeling from the alleyway, the sensation of ripping open the dam. He didn't just let it leak out this time. He pushed. Run! Izuku shouted. Boom! A shockwave of pure, concussive force exploded from Izuku's body. The sand beneath his feet was instantly blasted away, creating a 10-foot-wide crater around him. The towering mountains of trash shuddered, metal groaning and creaking as the sheer ambient pressure of his aura hit them. Biscuit's eyes widened, her hair whipping violently in the localized hurricane of Izuku's power. The green aura didn't just cloak him, it erupted skyward like a geyser of emerald fire, thick, dense, and suffocatingly heavy. The air around him shimmered with heat. To anyone sensitive to aura, standing near Izuku right now would feel like standing at the epicenter of a raging wildfire. It's even more potent than last night, Biscuit thought, suppressing a shiver. This boy, his emotional trauma, his repressed desire to be a hero, his sheer intellect, it's all acting as fuel. He doesn't just have high capacity. His aura has a terrifying density. It feels heavy, like being submerged in deep water. Hold it! Biscuit commanded, shouting over the roar of the aura. Don't let it disperse. Focus the flame. Izuku gritted his teeth, his face contorting in effort. The massive pillar of green fire began to condense, compressing closer to his body, turning from a wild inferno into a razor-sharp, blinding aura of sheer power. The physical strain on his unconditioned muscles was immense. He could feel his capillaries protesting, his bones aching under the pressure of his own energy. That's enough. Drop back to 10. Biscuit yelled. Izuku gasped, reeling the energy back in, sealing the floodgates until only the calm, steady shroud of 10 remained. He immediately dropped to one knee, panting heavily, sweat pouring from his brow. Just 10 seconds of full output Ren had left him feeling like he had sprinted a mile. Your capacity is monstrous, Biscuit noted, walking over and tossing him a bottle of water. But your output efficiency is garbage. You are wasting 70% of that energy just keeping it ignited. We need to train your node control until maintaining Ren is as natural as breathing. Izuku caught the water bottle, downing half of it in one gulp. How do we do that? Biscuit smiled warmly, pointing to a massive, rusted industrial refrigerator half buried in the sand. You're going to pick that up, carry it to the drop-off point at the edge of the beach, and you are going to do it while maintaining Ren the entire time. Izuku looked at the refrigerator. It had to weigh at least 400 pounds. He wiped his mouth, a determined glint in his eye. He marched over to the massive appliance. He planted his feet, gripping the rusted edges. Focus, he told himself. Don't just use your arms. Use the energy. He flared his Ren, feeling the emerald fire surge through his veins, reinforcing his muscle fibers, coating his skin in an armor of willpower. He heaved. With a sickening crunch of tearing rust, the 400-pound refrigerator was ripped from the sand. Izuku lifted it over his head, his arms trembling, his aura blazing wildly to compensate for his lack of physical musculature. Walk! Biscuit barked. And if your aura flickers, that fridge will crush your spine. Izuku took a step. The sand shifted under his weight. He took another. Thus began the first day of Izuku Midoriya's hell. For the next 4 months, Izuku's life was reduced to a brutal, unyielding cycle of pain, exhaustion, and incremental triumph. He woke up at 4 a.m., trained on the beach until school started, survived the mocking glares of his classmates at Aldera Junior High, and returned to the beach until midnight. His mother, Inko, was terrified at first. Her son was coming home covered in bruises, smelling of rust and sweat, and eating triple his usual amount of food. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen since the doctor told him he was quirkless. She saw life. She saw an unshakable, terrifying focus. So, she supported him the only way she could, by cooking massive, nutrient-dense meals and bandaging his hands. At school, Izuku underwent a metamorphosis. He no longer flinched when Bakugo slammed his hands on his desk. He no longer stuttered when called upon by the teacher. He sat perfectly still, enveloped in a microscopic, entirely invisible layer of tin. Bakugo noticed the change, and it infuriated him. "Hey, Deku!" Bakugo snarled one afternoon, cornering Izuku in the hallway after class. Small explosions popped harmlessly in Bakugo's palms. "You've been looking real cocky lately. You think you've figured out some kind of trick to get into UA? You're quirkless garbage." Izuku looked at Bakugo. He didn't see a terrifying bully anymore. With his aura nodes open, Izuku's senses had evolved. When he looked at Bakugo, he could sense the localized buildup of energy in the boy's palms. He could predict the exact microsecond an explosion was going to fire based on the microscopic twitch of Bakugo's muscles and the subtle shift in the air pressure. In a real fight, Izuku realized with clinical detachment, he could sidestep the explosion, coat his hand in a focused burst of concentrated aura, and shatter Bakugo's ribs before the blonde even realized he had moved. The realization was sobering. He held a lethal weapon in his soul. He didn't need to prove himself to Bakugo anymore. "I'm going to UA, Kaken," Izuku said calmly, his voice steady and quiet. "And I'm going to be a hero." Before Bakugo could react, Izuku simply walked past him. He used a brief, split-second activation of Zetsu, completely erasing his presence, his footsteps making absolutely no sound. By the time Bakugo whipped around with a snarl, Izuku was already at the end of the hallway, blending into the crowd of students. Bakugo stood there, frozen, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. He didn't know why, but for a fraction of a second, his instincts had screamed at him that he was in mortal danger. What the hell was that? Bakugo thought, his hands shaking slightly. The nerd, he completely disappeared. Month 6 of training. The beach was halfway cleared. The mountains of trash had been reduced to modest hills. Izuku stood bare-chested on the sand, his physique completely transformed. The scrawny, fragile boy was gone. In his place stood a young man carved from marble. His muscles were dense, compact, and highly functional, honed not by gym equipment, but by moving thousands of tons of metal while constantly regulating the flow of life energy through his cells. Biscuit sat on a beach chair under an umbrella, sipping a perfectly blended smoothie she had made from imported fruits. "Your physical vessel is finally adequate," Biscuit called out. "And your control over the basic principles is flawless. You can maintain 10 even while sleeping. Your Zetsu is completely unreadable, and your Rin can be sustained for 3 hours without fatigue." She stood up, walking over to him. "It is time to discover your Nen affinity. It is time for water divination." Izuku's eyes lit up. This was the moment he had read about in the secret notes Biscuit had provided him. The moment he would discover what kind of Hatsu he could develop. Biscuit produced a crystal-clear glass filled to the brim with water. She plucked a single, green leaf from a nearby shrub and gently floated it on the surface of the water. "Place your hands around the glass. Do not touch it. Channel your Rin into the water. The reaction will determine your aura type." Izuku nodded. He knew the categories. Enhancement, changing the volume of water; emission, changing the color of water; manipulation, moving the leaf; transmutation, changing the taste of the water; and conjuration, creating impurities in the water. He stepped up to the glass. He brought his hands up, hovering just inches from the crystal surface. He closed his eyes and flared his Rin. A focused, intense beam of green aura poured from his hands, enveloping the glass. He channeled his intent, his desire, and his essence directly into the liquid. Biscuit watched closely. She fully expected him to be an enhancer. He was straightforward, determined, and slightly stubborn, classic enhancer traits. If the water overflowed, she already had a training regimen prepared to maximize his brute force. But the water didn't overflow. Instead, a series of impossible reactions occurred all at once. First, the water instantly turned pitch black, as dark as the abyss. Second, it began to violently boil, hissing and spitting steam, yet the glass remained ice cold to the touch. Third, the green leaf floating on the surface didn't just move. It crystallized. The organic matter converted instantly into a perfectly cut, glowing emerald gemstone, which sank heavily to the bottom of the black, boiling water. Izuku opened his eyes, looking at the glass in confusion. Master Biscuit? What does this mean? It changed color, which is emission, but the leaf turned into a crystal. Is that conjuration? And it's boiling, so transmutation? Biscuit Kruger, a pro hunter with over 50 years of experience, a master of the Shinjinryu Kung Fu school, stared at the glass in absolute, stunned silence. She reached out, carefully picking the glass up. She examined the black, boiling liquid. She touched the cold glass. She looked at the emerald gemstone resting at the bottom. Izuku, Biscuit said, her voice unusually grave. There is a sixth category. A category that falls outside the normal bounds of Nin. It is reserved for those whose aura defies classification, whose lives are marked by extremes, and whose potential is entirely unpredictable. She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide. You are a specialist. Izuku blinked. A specialist? What does that mean for my Hatsu? It means, Biscuit laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated excitement, that you can create an ability that breaks the very laws of physics. You are not bound by the limitations of normal Nin users. Your aura can be whatever you demand it to be. She crushed the glass in her hand. The black water splashed onto the sand, and the emerald gemstone rolled to a stop at Izuku's feet. We have 4 months left until the UA exam, Biscuit declared, her aura flaring with a terrifying, muscular intensity. It is time to build your phantom arsenal, Izuku. We are going to forge a Hatsu that will make the number 1 hero look like a glorified traffic cop. Izuku looked down at the emerald gem. He picked it up. It was warm, thrumming with his own energy. He squeezed it in his palm, feeling the sharp edges bite into his hardened skin. He looked out at the ocean, the morning sun finally cresting over the horizon, bathing the world in golden light. I am not quirkless, Izuku thought, his emerald eyes glowing with a terrifying, unyielding light. I am a hunter. The tiny, perfectly cut emerald gemstone rested in the center of Izuku Midoriya's calloused palm. It was warm to the touch, humming with a faint, residual resonance of his own life energy. Around his feet, the sand of Dagoba Municipal Beach was stained black from the boiling water that had cascaded from the shattered glass just moments before. Biscuit Kruger stared at the boy, her sharp blue eyes calculating 1,000 different variables per second. A specialist, Izuku repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with a mix of reverence and confusion. I read the notes you gave me on the 6 Nin categories. Enhancers are simple and determined. Emitters are volatile. Transmuters are whimsical. Conjurers are high-strung. Manipulators are logical. But specialists, the notes said specialists are independent and charismatic. I'm not charismatic. Biscuit let out a sudden, barking laugh that echoed over the crashing waves. She walked around him, poking a stiff, perfectly manicured finger into his heavily muscled shoulder. Charisma isn't just about smiling for the cameras and giving pretty speeches, Izuku. Charisma is gravity. It's the ability to draw people, events, and fate itself into your orbit. You walked onto a rooftop ready to die, and instead, you drew a pro hunter from another dimension into your life. That is gravity. She stepped back, gesturing to the emerald in his hand. Furthermore, Nin is deeply tied to a person's upbringing, their desires, and their deepest psychological needs. Think about your life, Izuku. For 14 years, what have you done? What has been your obsession? Heroes, Izuku answered instantly. Quirks. Analyzing how they work, how they interact, their limits, their strengths. Exactly, Biscuit nodded, a proud smile gracing her youthful features. You lived in a world of superhumans, trapped in a normal body. Your mind compensated by becoming a sponge, absorbing the mechanics of thousands of different powers. You desperately wanted to stand among them, to mimic their strength. So, when your aura nodes were finally forcefully opened, your life energy took the shape of your deepest subconscious desire. You are a specialist because your soul is built to adapt, analyze, and mimic. Izuku looked down at his hands, the faint green shroud of his ten rippling softly over his skin. So, what does my Hatsu actually do? How did I turn the water black, boil it, and crystallize a leaf all at once? Biscuit crossed her arms, shifting into her teaching stance. You altered the fundamental properties of the matter inside the glass. You changed the water's light absorption, turning it black. You changed its thermal state, boiling it without a heat source. And you altered the carbon structure of the leaf, compressing it into a crystalline lattice. You didn't just enhance it or transmute your own aura. You manipulated the very physics of the object through pure intent. She pointed a finger at his chest. I have a theory for your Hatsu. I want you to call it Aura Aegis, the Phantom Arsenal. The Aegis is your defense, the application of enhancement to your physical body. The arsenal, that is your specialist ability. I hypothesize that you can temporarily mimic the fundamental physical properties of anything your aura touches and thoroughly analyzes. Izuku's mind, always hungry for tactical analysis, instantly kicked into overdrive. Mimic physical properties? You mean, if I channel my aura into a piece of rubber, I can make my aura elastic? Or if I touch a piece of steel, I can give my ten the tensile strength and density of that steel? Precisely, Biscuit grinned fiercely. It is the ultimate counter to a society that relies on rigid, biological quirks. A hero with an explosion quirk can only ever make explosions. But you can adapt to any battlefield, counter any element, and exploit any weakness. But it will require an absurd amount of aura control and intellectual focus. Izuku clenched his fist, the emerald gemstone digging into his skin. He didn't feel overwhelmed. For the first time in his life, he felt a profound, crystalline clarity. He had the blueprint. Now, he just had to build the weapon. We have 4 months left until the UA entrance exam, Biscuit announced, her voice turning cold and authoritative. Your physical conditioning is adequate. Your basic nin capacity is monstrous, but raw power is nothing without precision. Starting today, we move past the basics. You will learn the advanced combat applications of nin, gyo in, en, shu, ko, ken, and ryu, and you will learn them through combat. Without warning, Biscuit's body began to rapidly expand. The frilly pink dress tore at the seams as her muscles bulged to grotesque, superhuman proportions. Within 2 seconds, the petite young girl was replaced by a towering, 8-foot-tall behemoth of pure, unadulterated muscle. Her aura flared, an oppressive, suffocating weight that made the sand beneath her feet turn to glass. Defend yourself, specialist, Biscuit's deep, booming voice vibrated in Izuku's chest. She vanished. Izuku didn't even have time to blink. His combat instincts, honed over the last 6 months of hellish physical labor, screamed at him. He threw his arms up in an X-block, flaring his rin to maximum output. A fist the size of a cinder block slammed into his forearms. The impact sounded like a cannon firing. Izuku was launched backward like a ragdoll, flying 50 feet across the beach before crashing into a rusted mountain of car chassis. The metal screamed as he dented the side of a ruined sedan, his body screaming in agony. His ten had protected his bones from shattering, but the kinetic force had bruised his muscles right to the marrow. He coughed, spitting a glob of blood onto the sand as he unpeeled himself from the car. Too slow! Biscuit roared, already closing the distance, her fist pulled back for a second strike. You are distributing your aura evenly across your entire body. That is Ken. It is good for general defense, but against an opponent with superior striking power, an even distribution will break. She swung again, aiming for his ribs. Focus! She shouted mid-swing. Move your aura. Concentrate it where you need it. Ryu! Izuku gritted his teeth. Time seemed to slow down. He could see her fist coming, displacing the air, her own aura violently concentrated around her knuckles. If she hit him with that while his aura was evenly spread, his ribs would turn to dust. Move it! Izuku commanded his soul. He pulled the radiant green energy away from his legs, his back, and his head, funneling it entirely into his right side. The green light around his ribs flared brilliantly, hardening into a dense, vibrating armor just as Biscuit's fist made contact. Crack! Izuku was still pushed back, his feet carving deep trenches into the sand, but he didn't fly. He held his ground. His ribs ached, but they didn't break. He had successfully shifted 70% of his aura to his point of defense, leaving 30% to keep his body standing. Better! Biscuit praised, stepping back and dropping her massive fists. That is Ryu, the real-time flow of aura during combat. To master in combat, you must be able to shift your aura from defense to offense in a fraction of a second. When you attack, you must focus 100% of your aura into your striking limb. That is called Ko. But doing so leaves the rest of your body completely unprotected, in a state of Zetsu. Izuku panted heavily, clutching his side. High risk, high reward. Exactly, Biscuit nodded, shifting back into her petite, innocent-looking form to conserve energy. If you strike a quirk user with Ko, no matter how durable their mutation is, you will obliterate them. But if you miscalculate and they hit your unprotected body, you die. Combat is a game of percentages, Izuku. Over the next 4 months, I am going to beat those percentages into your muscle memory until you can perform Ryu while asleep. And she did. The final 4 months of Izuku Midoriya's training were a blur of blood, sweat, and localized property damage. The massive piles of trash on Dagoba Beach slowly vanished, not just from Izuku carrying them away, but from the concussive shockwaves of his missed Ko punches shattering rusted steel into fine dust. He learned to use Gyo, focusing a massive amount of aura into his eyes. The first time he activated it, the world exploded into vibrant, terrifying color. He could see the residual life energy of the microbes in the sand. He could see the faint, dissipating trails of aura left behind by seagulls in flight. And most importantly, he could see the exact flow of Biscuit's aura, predicting her attacks before her muscles even twitched. He learned Shu, extending his aura into physical objects. He practiced by holding a flimsy plastic straw and infusing it with his ten. With a single, swift motion, he drove the plastic straw straight through a solid block of concrete as if it were a titanium nail. He developed his Hatsu, the Phantom Arsenal. He sat for hours touching different materials: steel, rubber, fiberglass, water, fire from a lighter. He used his specialist affinity to analyze their atomic structures and vibrational frequencies, learning to encode those properties into his own aura. It was mentally exhausting, requiring a level of concentration that would have melted a normal human's brain. But Izuku was a boy who had spent a decade dissecting complex quirk mechanics in a charred notebook. This was what he was born to do. By the 9th month, the beach was pristine. The golden sand stretched out flawlessly toward the sparkling ocean. There was not a single piece of trash left. Standing at the shoreline was a boy who no longer resembled the timid victim of Aldera Junior High. Izuku Midoriya stood at 5'9", his posture straight, his shoulders broad. His unruly green hair blew in the ocean breeze, framing a face that was calm, sharp, and possessed an underlying, predatory stillness. The constant, microscopic layer of tan that clung to his skin gave his emerald eyes a faint, unnatural glow. He had become a master of his own soul. It was exactly 1 month before the UA entrance exam. Izuku was walking home from school, his yellow backpack slung over one shoulder. He was lost in thought, mentally running through the flow chart of his Ryu percentages, calculating the optimal aura distribution to counter a hypothetical high-speed projectile quirk. His classmates at Aldera had largely started ignoring him. Bakugo, for reasons Izuku understood perfectly well, had completely stopped bullying him. Ever since the day Izuku had subconsciously used Zetsu to vanish in the hallway, Bakugo's primal instincts had overridden his arrogance. Bakugo was like a feral dog. He barked loudly at those weaker than him, but when confronted with a tiger, he knew to keep his distance. As Izuku walked through the Tatooine shopping district, his train of thought was violently derailed. A massive, concussive boom shook the pavement beneath his feet. A plume of black smoke rose over the rooftops a few blocks away, followed immediately by the screams of panicked civilians and the unmistakable sound of secondary explosions. Explosions. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The rhythm of those blasts, it wasn't random. It was a precise, rapid-fire staccato. It was Kaken. Without a second thought, Izuku broke into a sprint. He didn't use Ren to boost his speed, he didn't want to draw attention, but his base physical conditioning was so advanced that he cleared the 3 blocks in a matter of seconds, easily outpacing the normal citizens fleeing the scene. He rounded the corner and skidded to a halt, joining a large crowd of onlookers pressing against the police barricade. The scene before him was absolute chaos. The alleyway between 2 commercial buildings was entirely engulfed in a raging inferno. The heat was blistering, melting the street signs and shattering the windows of the adjacent shops. In the center of the blaze was a nightmare. A massive, undulating mass of dark, putrid green sludge was thrashing wildly, tearing at the masonry of the buildings. It was a villain composed entirely of fluid, a horrifying, amorphous blob with 2 giant, frantic eyeballs floating near the top. And trapped within the viscous center of the sludge was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo was struggling violently, his face turning purple from lack of oxygen. He was thrashing his arms, firing massive, panicked explosions from his palms in a desperate attempt to blast the sludge away. But the explosions were only feeding the fire, setting the surrounding buildings alight, and the villain's fluid body simply reformed around the blasts. "It's no use!" a pro-hero shouted. Izuku recognized him. Death Arms, a strength-enhancing hero. "There's nothing to grab onto. It's completely fluid, my wood will just catch fire in this heat." Kamui Woods yelled, shielding his face from the intense blaze. "I need 2 lanes for my quirk to be effective. I can't get in there." Empty Lady complained, standing uselessly at the edge of the street. Izuku stood at the front of the crowd, his face completely expressionless. He watched the pro-heroes, adults who had dedicated their lives to saving people, standing around, making excuses, waiting for someone else with a better quirk to show up. This is what Master Biscuit meant, Izuku thought coldly. They rely so heavily on their specific genetic mutations that the moment they encounter a situation outside their niche, they become completely paralyzed. They lack foundational combat logic. They lack willpower. Izuku looked past the useless heroes and focused on Bakugo. Bakugo's red eyes met Izuku's green ones through the suffocating sludge. There was no arrogance in Bakugo's gaze right now. There was only pure, unadulterated terror. He was dying, drowning in filth, and the heroes were just watching. He's suffocating. Time to oxygen deprivation of the brain is roughly 3 minutes. He's already been in there for at least 2. Izuku didn't panic. He didn't feel the sudden, reckless surge of adrenaline that drove normal people to act. He felt the cold, hyper-focused absolute stillness of a hunter tracking its prey. Step 1: bypass the perimeter. Izuku blinked, instantly shutting off his aura nodes. Zetsu. His presence vanished from the world. To the police officers holding the barricade, Izuku simply ceased to register as a point of interest. He ducked under the yellow police tape and walked calmly onto the battlefield. He didn't run. Running drew the eye. He moved with a practiced, fluid silence, walking right past Death Arms and Kamui Woods. Neither hero even noticed the teenager brushing past their shoulders. Step 2: analyze the target. Izuku stopped 20 feet from the blazing inferno. He dropped his Zetsu and flared a highly concentrated burst of aura into his optic nerves. "Gyo," Izuku whispered. The world shifted. The blinding orange flames and the thick black smoke became translucent to his augmented vision. He looked directly at the sludge villain. To the naked eye, the villain was a massive, impenetrable wall of fluid. But with Gyo, Izuku could see the faint, sickly yellow flow of the villain's life energy. Because the villain was largely composed of fluid, his aura was dispersed, weak, and uncoordinated. But Izuku's eyes tracked the flow of energy to its source. Deep within the sludge, roughly 3 feet below the floating eyeballs, there was a dense, physical knot of biological matter. It was a nervous system, a concentrated core of mass that controlled the fluid. Found it. The physical anchor. "Hey! Kid! What are you doing?" Death Arms finally noticed him, screaming in panic. "Get back here! You'll die!" The sludge villain noticed him too. The massive eyeballs shifted downward, glaring at the boy standing calmly in the street. "Another meat suit?" The villain gurgled, a voice like bubbling tar. "I don't need you. I have a prime vessel right here. Get lost, brat, before I snap your neck." A massive, whip-like tendril of solid sludge erupted from the main body, lashing out toward Izuku's head with enough kinetic force to decapitate a normal human. Step 3. Execution. Izuku didn't dodge. 10. He breathed. A blinding, emerald light erupted from Izuku's skin. The shroud of pure, dense life energy formed a perfect, immovable barrier around him. The sludge tendril struck Izuku directly on the cheek and instantly violently shattered, bursting into a shower of filthy rain upon impact with his aura. The sludge villain shrieked in confusion. What? What is that? A force field quirk? Bakugo, despite suffocating, watched with wide, disbelieving eyes. Deku? What the hell is that light? Izuku didn't answer. He stepped forward. The ambient heat of the alleyway fires parted around his ten like water around a stone. He stepped directly into the massive pool of sludge. The villain panicked, trying to force the filthy fluid down Izuku's throat, trying to drown him from the outside in. But the sludge couldn't even touch Izuku's clothes. It was repelled by the absolute density of his aura. Izuku stopped directly in front of the villain's main mass. He raised his right arm, pulling his fist back to his waist. Step 4. Extermination. Izuku closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He pulled the emerald shroud away from his head, his legs, his chest, and his left arm. He funneled 100% of his monstrous, ocean-like aura into his right fist. Ko, Izuku commanded. His right hand became a miniature sun. The sheer density of the aura gathered around his knuckles began to violently warp the air, creating a high-pitched, screaming frequency that shattered the remaining windows on the street. The light was blinding, casting stark, terrifying shadows across the alleyway. The sludge villain felt the sudden, apocalyptic pressure radiating from that tiny fist. The villain's survival instinct screamed. Death. Wait. No! The villain shrieked, trying to eject Bakugo and flee. Too late. Izuku opened his eyes, staring directly at the hidden core he had located with Gyo. He stepped forward, twisting his hips, and drove his fist forward in a flawless, textbook martial arts punch. He didn't aim for Bakugo. He didn't aim for the eyes. He aimed for the precise, microscopic point in space where the villain's nervous system anchored the fluid. The moment Izuku's co-infused fist struck the sludge, the laws of physics violently reasserted themselves. Boom! The impact didn't just displace the fluid. The concentrated kinetic force and raw life energy created a localized, hyper-pressurized shockwave. A massive dome of air exploded outward from Izuku's fist. The sludge villain didn't even have time to scream. The shockwave hit his core, instantly obliterating his physical anchor and atomizing his consciousness. The massive, building-sized wave of sludge was instantly vaporized, violently blasted into microscopic droplets that rained down over the entire shopping district like a filthy mist. The shockwave didn't stop there. The sheer force of the punch violently displaced the oxygen in the alleyway, creating a localized vacuum that instantly snuffed out the raging fires. The dark clouds above the city were physically torn open by an ascending pillar of air pressure, revealing the bright blue afternoon sky. Silence slammed back into the street, save for the patter of sludge raining down on the pavement. Bakugo, suddenly freed from his liquid prison, fell forward. Izuku's aura instantly flowed back from his fist, redistributing into a calm, gentle 10. He reached out and caught Bakugo by the collar of his uniform before the blonde could hit the ground. Izuku lowered his childhood bully gently to the asphalt. Bakugo was coughing violently, hacking up vile sludge, tears streaming down his face as he greedily sucked in oxygen. Izuku stood over him, perfectly clean, his white school shirt unwrinkled, his breathing completely even. He hadn't even broken a sweat. The pro-heroes were frozen in absolute shock. Death Arm's jaw was hanging open. Empty Lady had dropped to her knees, staring at the sky where the clouds had been literally punched away. The civilians were dead silent. Are you breathing, Kakin? Izuku asked, his voice calm, polite, and entirely detached. Bakugo looked up, his red eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock, humiliation, and terror. He looked at Izuku's hand, the hand that had just unleashed a force of nature. What the fuck are you, Deku? Bakugo rasped, his voice trembling. Izuku just smiled faintly. Someone who didn't wait for a hero with a better quirk. Before the pro-heroes could snap out of their stupor, before the media drones could point their cameras at his face, Izuku blinked, perfectly executing Zetsu. His aura vanished. His presence dissolved. In the chaotic aftermath, amidst the raining sludge and coughing victims, nobody noticed the green-haired boy simply turn around and walk away, melting into the shadows of the alleyway and disappearing from the scene entirely. Izuku walked home via the back streets, keeping his Zetsu active. He didn't want to deal with police statements or pro-heroes lecturing him about vigilantism. He had done what was necessary, and the outcome was optimal. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His training had paid off. The transition from Zetsu to Gyo to Ten to Ko had been flawless. He had perfectly manipulated his aura to execute a surgical strike, saving a life without causing unnecessary collateral damage, aside from the shattered windows, which were already broken by the fire. He was so deeply lost in his own tactical post-battle analysis that he almost didn't hear the heavy, thudding footsteps behind him. Almost. Izuku stopped. He didn't turn around. He instantly flared his En, a spherical expansion of his aura, pushing his senses out to a radius of 50 feet. The presence behind him was massive. It wasn't hostile, but the sheer volume of energy radiating from the figure was staggering. It felt like standing next to a dormant volcano. "I am here!" A booming voice echoed through the empty residential street. Izuku sighed, retracting his En and slowly turning around. Standing in the middle of the street, blocking his path, was a towering mountain of a man in a pinstripe suit. Golden hair styled into two prominent V-shaped bangs, a jawline carved from granite, and an impossibly wide, beaming smile. All Might. The symbol of peace. "Young man!" All Might boomed, marching forward with tremendous energy. "I saw what you did back there. I had been tracking that sludge villain for hours. I must apologize. I had reached my limit for the day, and I was forced to stand by and watch as a spectator while you leaped into action. Your bravery, your precise strike, and that incredible quirk. You blew away the very clouds." Izuku stared at his childhood idol. 10 months ago, on that rooftop, meeting this man had been the defining tragedy of his life. All Might had looked at a quirkless boy and told him to give up. Now Izuku felt nothing. No hero worship. No anger. Just a calm, analytical curiosity. "It wasn't a quirk, All Might," Izuku said quietly. All Might paused, his booming smile faltering slightly. "Ah? Not a quirk? But the light. The force. I have never seen a support item capable of such a feat." "It's not an item either," Izuku said, his voice level. 10 months ago, on a rooftop overlooking the commercial district, I asked you if a quirkless boy could become a hero like you. You told me to be realistic." All Might froze. His vibrant blue eyes widened in shock. The imposing, muscular facade suddenly wavered. In a puff of steam, the towering god of justice deflated, replaced by a skeletal, sickly man coughing up blood into a handkerchief. Tashinori Yagi wiped his mouth, staring at the boy with profound realization. You're that boy. The quirkless boy. But how? What I just saw, that was power that rivaled my own. If you didn't manifest a delayed quirk, then what was that? It's something else, Izuku said, deciding to keep the exact nature of Nin a secret. Biscuit had explicitly warned him against explaining his power to the superhuman society. It's a different kind of strength. I unlocked it. And I'm going to use it to pass the UA exam. Tashinori stared at the boy. The timid, trembling child he had met on the roof was completely gone. In his place stood a young man with an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. The air around the boy felt strangely heavy, commanding a respect that Tashinori usually only felt around seasoned, veteran pro-heroes. I deeply apologize, young man, Tashinori said softly, bowing his head. I failed you that day. I let my own cynicism and my own failing body cloud my judgment. I told you that you couldn't be a hero, but today you proved me wrong. You stepped in when the pros hesitated. You possess the most essential quality of a hero, a body that moves before the brain can think. Izuku internally disagreed. His brain had thought quite a lot before his body moved. But he remained silent. Tashinori stepped forward, his skeletal face glowing with a sudden, intense fervor. Young man. Izuku Midoriya. I have come to offer you a proposition. I have come to offer you my power. Izuku blinked. Offer me his power? What do you mean? Toshinori raised his hand. My quirk is not a natural mutation. It is a sacred torch, passed down from generation to generation. It is called One for All. It is a power that stockpiles the physical strength and energy of its users, passing that accumulated power to the next. I am the eighth wielder. And I have been searching for a successor. Izuku's analytical mind immediately went into overdrive. A transferable quirk? A power that stockpiles energy and physical strength. You want to give it to me? Izuku asked, his brow furrowing. But I already have my own power now. I don't need a quirk. Perhaps you don't, Toshinori smiled warmly. But a hero's job is to save everyone they can reach. With your discipline, your mysterious new strength, and the raw, stockpiled power of One for All, you could become a symbol of peace that far surpasses me. You could save millions. Izuku went silent. He didn't need a quirk. His nin was already terrifyingly strong. He was a specialist, capable of adapting to any combat scenario. But what would happen if a quirk that explicitly stockpiled energy and physical strength was injected into a body with unsealed, hyperactive aura nodes? Nin was life energy. It was intrinsically tied to physical stamina, biological health, and raw bodily power. If One for All aggressively boosted the host's physical and energetic capacity, Izuku's breath hitched as the theoretical mathematics aligned in his head. If One for All acts as an internal, compounding battery, and my aura nodes are wide open, the quirk won't just sit in my DNA. It will instantly flood my nin circuit. It will act as an infinite fuel source for my aura. It wouldn't just make him strong. It would make his aura reserves practically bottomless. It would push his rin past the limits of human biology. Izuku looked up at All Might. He saw the genuine, desperate hope in the skeletal man's eyes. He saw a man who wanted to leave the world in safe hands. I accept, Izuku said firmly. Toshinori smiled broadly, relief washing over his tired face. He reached up, plucked a single strand of golden hair from his head, and held it out. Then, eat this. Izuku stared at the hair. Are you serious? It requires the ingestion of DNA to transfer. Toshinori laughed heartily. Don't worry, it's just a hair. Go on, quickly, before someone sees. Izuku sighed, took the hair, and swallowed it dry. It was deeply unpleasant. It will take a few hours for your body to digest and for the quirk factor to integrate into your system, Toshinori explained, transforming back into his muscular form in a burst of steam. When you wake up tomorrow, you will feel it. Welcome to the legacy of One for All, young Midoriya. With a mighty leap, All Might launched himself into the sky, disappearing over the rooftops. Izuku stood in the street for a moment, waiting for a profound change. He felt nothing but a slight tickle in his throat. A few hours, Izuku thought. He didn't go home. He didn't want to be in a confined space if his theory about the interaction between One for All and Nen was correct. Instead, he walked back to Dagoba Beach. The sun had set, and a crescent moon hung in the dark sky, casting a silver reflection over the calm ocean waves. Izuku walked to the edge of the seawall, sat down on the sand in the lotus position, and began to meditate. He maintained a perfectly even 10, keeping his aura close to his skin, waiting. 3 hours passed. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the waves. Then it happened. At exactly midnight, Izuku's internal chronometer registered a violent, cataclysmic shift in his biology. The quirk factor of One for All finally digested, seeking an anchor in his DNA. In a normal human, the quirk would latch onto the genetic sequence, establishing a sealed loop of power waiting to be drawn upon. But Izuku Midoriya was not normal. His aura nodes were permanently, forcefully dilated. When One for All ignited within his core, it found no sealed container. It found an open floodgate leading directly to his soul. Izuku gasped, his eyes snapping open. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt as though a dying star had been forcefully shoved into his chest cavity. The stockpiled physical power of 8 generations of heroes violently collided with the boundless, emerald ocean of his nin. Ayaha! Izuku screamed, unable to contain the agony. He couldn't hold his 10. The shroud shattered. The reaction was apocalyptic. A pillar of aura exploded from Izuku's body, instantly vaporizing the sand beneath him in a 50-foot radius. The energy wasn't just green anymore. It was a terrifying, blinding mixture of emerald fire and crackling, golden lightning. The sheer ambient pressure of his erupting aura hit the ocean like a physical wall. The tide was forcefully pushed back, the water parting under the monstrous weight of his life force. The stone seawall behind him cracked, spider-webbing with massive fissures as if hit by a magnitude 8 earthquake. Izuku was suspended in the center of the golden-green inferno, floating 3 feet off the ground, his arms spread wide, his back arching in agony. The energy wasn't leaking away. It was compounding. One for All was aggressively stockpiling his aura faster than it could escape, creating a localized singularity of pure power. The density of his aura became so thick that the air itself began to crystallize around him, snapping and popping with violent electrostatic discharges. A mile away, standing on the roof of a tall apartment building, Biscuit Kruger was rudely awakened by her finely tuned hunter instincts screaming in pure, unadulterated terror. She bolted upright, her eyes locking onto the distant shoreline. Even from a mile away, she could see the towering pillar of golden-green light piercing the night sky. But worse than the light was the feeling. Biscuit gripped the edge of the roof, her hands trembling. She had met some of the most terrifying monsters in the Hunter Association. She had stood in the presence of Isaac Netero. She had felt the terrifying malice of apex nim beasts, but the aura radiating from the beach was something entirely beyond human comprehension. It was bottomless. It was ancient. It was the aura of a god. What did you do, Izuku? Biscuit thought, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. Your capacity, it just multiplied 1,000-fold. This is no longer the aura of a human being. This is the aura of a planetary threat. On the beach, the eruption finally reached its peak. Izuku violently clamped his jaw shut. His mind, trained in the hellfires of Biscuit's regimen, seized control of the raging storm. He envisioned the shroud. He envisioned the absolute boundary of 10. With a sound like a thunderclap, the towering pillar of golden-green energy instantly snapped back into his body. The sudden silence was deafening. The ocean waves came crashing back into the shore, filling the void left by his displaced power. Izuku dropped to the ground, landing silently on his bare feet on the glassy, fused sand. He didn't collapse from exhaustion. He didn't pant. He stood perfectly straight, looking down at his hands. The aura clinging to his skin was no longer a wispy vapor. It was a dense, fluid layer of golden-green light that looked like liquid armor. It hummed with a frequency that made the very air around him vibrate. He felt no fatigue. He felt no strain. One for All had completely integrated with his nin. His physical body had been elevated to godlike proportions to house the energy, and his aura reserves had expanded to an infinite horizon. Izuku clenched his fist. The air inside his palm violently popped, a miniature sonic boom created simply by the speed of his closing fingers. He looked out over the ocean, his glowing emerald eyes reflecting the moonlight. He had wanted to be a hero. He had wanted to prove that a quirkless boy could stand among the gods of this society. But as he felt the absolute, world-shaking power coursing through his veins, Izuku realized the truth. He wasn't going to stand among them. He was going to stand above them. The morning sun crested over the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant strokes of gold and crimson, but the light seemed to dim when it touched the fused glass sands of Dagoba Municipal Beach. Biscuit Kruger sat cross-legged on the seawall, her eyes fixed on the boy hovering 3 feet above the ground. Izuku Midoriya wasn't using a quirk to fly. He was levitating purely through the sheer, oppressive output of his life energy pressing against the earth. His 10, the foundational shroud of aura, had fundamentally changed since the midnight singularity. It was no longer just a tranquil green vapor. It was a dense, liquid mantle of emerald light, threaded with violently crackling veins of golden electricity. Izuku, Biscuit called out, her voice cutting through the hum of his power. Descend. And suppress it. You're giving me a headache. Izuku opened his eyes. The glowing, verdant irises seemed to capture the sunlight. He exhaled slowly. The massive torrent of energy seamlessly vanished, folding back into his body until only a microscopic, perfectly invisible layer of 10 remained. Gravity reasserted its hold, and his bare feet touched the glassified sand without making a single sound. How does the vessel feel? Biscuit asked, hopping down from the wall and walking a slow circle around him, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of physical degradation. It feels infinite, Izuku murmured, looking at his palms. Before yesterday, mine was a massive lake. If I used a technique like Ren or Ko, I could feel the water level dropping. I could feel the stamina cost. But now, he clenched his fist. A localized shockwave of displaced air popped like a firecracker. Now, there is no bottom, he continued, his analytical mind spinning. The quirk factor I ingested, one for all, is a stockpiling ability, but because my aura nodes were completely open when it integrated, the quirk didn't build a separate reservoir for its power. It merged directly with my nin circuit. The stockpiled kinetic energy of 8 generations is aggressively feeding my aura, multiplying it faster than I can possibly expend it. My life energy is effectively regenerating instantaneously. Biscuit stopped in front of him, a predatory grin spreading across her youthful face. A perpetual motion machine of the soul. You possess the raw aura capacity of an entire civilization, Izuku, but raw power is a blunt instrument. A bomb can destroy a building, but it cannot pick a lock. Today, we forge your key. We finalize your Hatsu. Izuku nodded, his expression hardening into pure focus. Over the last 4 months, he had been experimenting with his specialist affinity. He knew the theory behind Aura Aegis, the Phantom Arsenal, but merging it with his newly godlike aura reserves was entirely uncharted territory. The concept is mimicry and enhancement, Biscuit lectured, pacing the sand. As a specialist, your nin defies traditional categories. You possess the intellectual obsession to analyze the atomic and physical properties of the world around you. Your Hatsu will allow you to encode those physical properties directly into your aura. Show me what you have mastered so far. Izuku stepped toward a discarded, heavy-duty titanium beam that had somehow escaped the beach cleanup. He placed his bare right hand flat against the cold metal. He didn't just feel the metal, he listened to it. He sent a microscopic thread of aura into the titanium, feeling its dense atomic lattice, its high tensile strength, its rigidity, and its lack of thermal conductivity. His mind, trained by a decade of obsessively dissecting complex quirks, mapped the physical blueprint in milliseconds. He pulled his hand back. Property acquired. Transmute, Biscuit commanded. Izuku focused his aura into his right arm. The invisible shroud of 10 suddenly shifted. It didn't change color, but the air around his arm seemed to warp. The aura physically thickened, adopting a dull, metallic sheen. Biscuit picked up a jagged chunk of rusted iron from the seawall and threw it at Izuku's face with the speed of a bullet. Izuku didn't flinch. He simply raised his aura-coated forearm. Clang. The sound was not that of metal striking flesh. It was the deafening ring of a sledgehammer striking a church bell. The chunk of iron violently shattered into powder upon impact with Izuku's arm. Izuku's skin wasn't even scratched. Titanium density, Izuku explained, looking at his arm. My aura perfectly mimics the tensile strength and hardness of the metal. But, he channeled a fraction of 1 for all, just 1% of the stockpiled power, into his enhancement principles. Because I am using nin, I can artificially enhance the mimic property beyond its natural physical limits. Izuku swung his arm through the air. He didn't hit anything, but the sheer weight and density of his titanium-infused aura acting at high velocity sheared the air itself, creating a vacuum blade that carved a 10-foot-deep trench into the sand 20 yards away. Biscuit clapped slowly, her blue eyes wide with genuine awe. Terrifying. You have created an ability with absolutely no blind spots. If you face a fire user, you can mimic the properties of water or asbestos. If you face a physical brawler, you become steel. If you need to capture a target, you can turn your aura into high-tensile rubber. The Phantom Arsenal, Izuku whispered, letting the titanium property fade from his aura. I can store the structural blueprints in my memory. Once I've analyzed a material, I can recall and equip its properties instantly using my aura. And the Aegis? Biscuit asked. The Aegis is the defensive application, Izuku replied, his eyes glowing. By combining my advanced full-body defense, with 1 for all stockpiled energy, my aura becomes physically impenetrable. I don't even need to mimic a material for defense anymore. The sheer, terrifying density of my life force acts as an absolute kinetic barrier. Biscuit walked up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her expression softened, the strict master giving way to a proud mentor. 10 months ago, you were a broken boy ready to throw his life away. Today, you hold the power to reshape this entire world, Izuku. The UA entrance exam is in 2 hours. You have nothing left to learn from this beach. Go. Show this society of false gods what true power looks like. Izuku bowed deeply, perfectly executing a 90-degree angle of respect. Thank you, Master Kruger. For everything. When he rose, Biscuit was already walking away, her form shimmering as she utilized her own advanced movement techniques. She paused, looking over her shoulder with a smirk. Don't hold back too much, Izuku. I want to see the fireworks on the evening news. I won't, Izuku promised. The massive, towering H-shaped gates of UA High School loomed over the sea of anxious teenagers. The morning air was crisp, but it felt thick with the nervous energy of thousands of students hoping to claim a spot in the most prestigious hero academy on the planet. Izuku Midoriya stood among them, wearing his black Alderet Junior High uniform. He looked completely out of place, but not for the reasons he would have 10 months ago. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't muttering into a notebook. He was perfectly, unnervingly still. While the other students fidgeted, stretched, or nervously tested their quirks, Izuku existed in a state of absolute setsu. He had completely shut off his aura nodes, erasing his presence from the world. People unconsciously stepped around him without realizing he was there, their primal instincts gently guiding them away from the apex predator hiding in plain sight. Out of my way, extras! A harsh, familiar voice shattered the morning murmur. Katsuki Bakugo stomped through the crowd, his face twisted into a permanent scowl, hands shoved deep into his pockets. Students scrambled to get out of his path. Izuku didn't move. Bakugo marched forward, fully intending to shoulder check whoever was in his way. But as he stepped within a 3-foot radius of Izuku, his body violently seized up. A cold sweat erupted on the back of Bakugo's neck. His red eyes widened, snapping toward the green-haired boy standing motionless in his path. The memory of the sludge villain incident flashed in Bakugo's mind. The localized shockwave. The vaporized clouds. The look in Deku's eyes that said he was swatting a fly rather than fighting a monster. Bakugo swallowed hard. The arrogant sneer faltered. Without saying a single word, the explosive boy slightly adjusted his trajectory, giving Izuku a wide berth as he walked past, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Izuku watched him go with mild amusement. Fear is a potent survival instinct, he noted clinically. As Izuku resumed walking toward the entrance, a girl with a brown bob and a permanent blush tripped over a loose paving stone. She pitched forward, bracing for a painful impact with the concrete. Izuku didn't panic. He didn't rush forward to catch her like a bumbling protagonist. He simply flared a microscopic fraction of his aura, a thread of emission combined with his phantom arsenal's rubber property. The invisible thread shot out, wrapping gently around the girl's waist. The kinetic energy of her fall was instantly absorbed by the elastic aura, pulling her upright with a soft, bouncy momentum. She blinked in confusion, hovering an inch above the ground for a fraction of a second before her feet planted firmly on the pavement. Izuku severed the aura thread, letting it dissipate into the atmosphere. Whoa! The girl gasped, looking around in bewilderment. Did I just bounce? I didn't even use my quirk. She turned and locked eyes with Izuku. He gave her a polite, detached nod. Careful where you step, Izuku said smoothly. His voice was calm, resonant, and entirely lacking its former squeak. Oh. Thank you. She beamed, her face turning pink. I'm Achiko Uraraka. Did you do that? What's your quirk? I just caught you, Izuku replied vaguely, not breaking his stride as he walked past her. Good luck on the exam, Uraraka. He left her standing there, staring after him with a mix of gratitude and profound curiosity. The written portion of the exam was an insult to Izuku's intellect. He had spent his entire life analyzing complex physics, chemistry, and biology to understand quirks. The standard high school curriculum was finished in under 20 minutes. Now, he sat in the massive, darkened auditorium for the practical exam orientation. The voice hero, Present Mike, was screaming enthusiastically into the microphone, explaining the rules of the urban battle center. Villain bots. Points. A countdown. While Present Mike spoke, Izuku closed his eyes and slowly expanded his in, and was the advanced application of Ten and Ren, stretching the aura into a sensory dome. Usually, a master could cover perhaps 50 meters. Izuku's aura rolled out like an invisible, silent tidal wave. It washed over the auditorium, expanding until it covered a 2-mile radius, engulfing the entire UA campus. Izuku's brain instantly cataloged the biological signatures of every living being within the dome. He felt the heartbeats of the 2,000 examinees. He felt the massive, radiant, but flickering aura of All Might sitting in a dark observation room deep within the facility. He felt the strange, highly intelligent signature of a creature that was not quite animal and not quite human, Principal Niza. He also mapped the subterranean structures. He felt the massive mechanical vibrations of the Foe City battle centers. He sensed the dormant villain bots, and deep below ground beta, he sensed the monolithic, towering mass of steel and engine blocks. The zero-pointer, Izuku noted. Over 300 feet tall. Weight estimated at several thousand tons. A pure obstacle designed to test psychological resilience. Excuse me. A tall, blue-haired boy with glasses abruptly stood up, pointing rigidly at the stage. Tenya Ida, on the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. Furthermore, Ida whipped around, pointing his rigid finger directly at Izuku, who was sitting a few rows behind him. You, with the unruly hair. You have been sitting perfectly still with your eyes closed this entire time. If you are asleep, or treating this exam as a joke, then leave this place immediately. You are insulting the efforts of everyone here. The entire auditorium turned to look at Izuku. Bakugo, sitting 2 seats away, actually flinched and leaned away from Izuku, an action that confused the hell out of the other students. Izuku slowly opened his eyes. He didn't look angry. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked at Ida the way a scientist looks at an interesting insect. Izuku didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laced his fingers together and spoke. I am perfectly awake, Examinee 7111, Izuku said. His voice wasn't loud, but through a microscopic application of aura to his vocal cords, it resonated clearly in the ears of every single person in the massive room. I have already memorized the entire pamphlet, including the addendum regarding the 0-point obstacle, which the proctor was just about to explain before you interrupted him. I suggest you sit down and allow him to finish, lest you continue to waste our allocated time. The absolute, chilling authority in his tone hit the room like a physical wave of cold air. Ida's jaw snapped shut. His rigid posture wilted under the crushing weight of Izuku's emerald gaze. He sat down instantly, muttering a quick apology. Up in the observation room, the pro-heroes watched the interaction through the security cameras. Interesting, Aizawa Shota muttered, his eyes narrowing from his sleeping bag. He didn't use a quirk to project his voice. The microphones didn't spike. It was pure acoustic resonance. And his presence, it's completely unreadable. All Might, sitting in his skeletal form in the corner, smiled proudly to himself. Show them, young Midoriya. Show them the power of your discipline and the legacy of One for All. Battle Center B was a sprawling replica of a modern metropolis. Towering skyscrapers, paved roads, and alleyways stretched out under the artificial sunlight. A massive crowd of students stood nervously before the towering steel gates. Izuku stood at the very front, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He had engaged his aura aegis, a perfectly compressed, infinitely dense layer of kin, reinforced by the stockpiled power of One for All, coated his body like a second skin. It was invisible to the naked eye, but the air around him rippled with thermal distortion. Right, let's start. Present Mick's voice boomed from the hidden speakers. Get moving! There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The gates groaned open. Before the heavy doors had even parted a full foot, Izuku vanished. There was no dust cloud. There was no sound of a footstep. He simply ceased to be at the front of the crowd and reappeared 50 yards down the main street of the artificial city. He had used a burst of emission beneath his feet to propel himself forward at speeds that made the human eye stutter. Where did he go? A random student yelled, finally breaking into a sprint. Izuku was already deep in the city. 3 one-pointer robots rolled out from an alleyway, their optical sensors locking onto him. Target acquired, the robotic voices droned. Machine guns spun up on their forearms, firing a barrage of rubber bullets meant to sting and bruise. Izuku didn't dodge. He didn't even break his casual stride. The barrage of rubber bullets struck his invisible aegis. They didn't bounce off. The sheer, vibrating density of his aura instantly pulverized the projectiles into fine black dust upon impact. Izuku walked through the hail of fire like a man walking through a light drizzle. He reached the first robot. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't assume a martial arts stance. He simply walked through it. Izuku brushed his shoulder against the heavy steel chassis of the one-pointer. The moment physical contact was made, the kinetic force of Izuku's forward momentum, backed by the infinite mass of his aegis, acted like a wrecking ball. The robot violently exploded, its steel frame shattering into 1,000 pieces, the shockwave ripping the concrete beneath its treads. 3 points, Izuku counted mentally. He turned the corner. A massive three-pointer, built like a scorpion, lunged at him with a heavy, hydraulic pincer. Izuku raised his right hand. Phantom Arsenal. Titanium density 5% one for all. His hand took on a dull, terrifying sheen. He didn't swing hard. He performed a casual, downward karate chop against the incoming steel pincer. The collision was entirely silent for a fraction of a second, before the laws of physics caught up. The titanium-infused aura cleaved through the robot's heavy armor like a laser through warm butter. The three-pointer was perfectly bisected down the middle, its internal wiring sparking violently as the two halves of its chassis fell away from Izuku. 6 points, Izuku inhaled, adjusting the flow of his energy. He dropped the titanium property, reverting to pure Ren. He leapt into the air, soaring 4 stories high, easily clearing the rooftops. From his vantage point, he used Gyo to survey the city below. He saw the glowing, mechanical energy signatures of 20 different villain bots gathered in a central plaza. He manipulated his aura, gathering a massive pool of energy in his right leg. He descended like a meteor. When Izuku's foot touched the center of the plaza, he released a localized emission wave combined with an explosive burst of one for all. Boom! The entire plaza cratered inward. The shockwave of pure kinetic energy rippled outward, violently overturning cars and ripping the pavement to shreds. All 20 robots in the plaza were instantly crushed flat against the walls of the surrounding buildings by the sheer, concussive pressure of his landing. 66 points, Izuku calculated, standing up amidst the settling dust, completely unharmed. That should be a sufficient passing grade for the hero course. Now I just need to monitor the area for civilian casualties. Or in this case, failing examinees. In the judge's observation room, absolute, terrified silence reigned. A massive wall of monitors displayed the action from Battle Center B. But no one was watching Bakugo's explosions. No one was watching Ida's speed. Every single pro-hero, from Midnight to Snipe to Aizawa, was staring at the feed of Izuku Midoriya. Nizu, the hyper-intelligent principal of UA, dropped his teacup. It shattered on the floor. Eraserhead, Nizu said, his furry paws trembling slightly. Please explain to me what I am looking at. Aizawa's shoulder leaned forward, his bloodshot eyes wide. He's not using a quirk. I tried to erase it when he entered the plaza. My quirk locked onto him, but his power didn't vanish. The destruction continued. Impossible, Midnight gasped. If it's not a quirk, then what is it? Support gear? He's not wearing anything. Look at the telemetry data. Power Loader pointed a shaking finger at a secondary screen. The robots he brushed past didn't just break. The molecular bonds of their armor were violently sheared apart by pure kinetic force. And when he chopped that three-pointer, the thermal sensors registered a localized heat distortion, but no actual flame. He's manipulating physics on a whim. All Might sat in the back, sweating profusely. Young Midoriya, you truly are a monster. I gave you a stockpile of raw power, and you forged it into a godlike weapon in 10 short months. But, why does your power feel so ancient? He has 66 points, Nizu murmured, recovering his composure. He destroyed an entire platoon of robots in less than 4 minutes without breaking a sweat. His heart rate hasn't even elevated above 70 beats per minute. He is treating this like a leisurely stroll. Nizu reached forward and slammed his paw down on a large red button. Let us see how the untouchable boy handles true terror. Back in Battle Center B, the ground began to violently tremble. Izuku paused, standing amidst the wreckage of his latest kill. He felt the massive vibrations through the soles of his feet. He didn't need N to know what was coming. At the far end of the main thoroughfare, the skyscrapers were violently ripped apart. A colossal, towering behemoth of steel and treads crushed the buildings into dust. It was the zero-pointer. It was the size of a kaiju, blotting out the sun, casting a massive, terrifying shadow over the entire artificial city. The other examinees in the area stopped fighting. Pure panic set in. Run! It's a monster! We don't get points for that thing. Retreat! The students turned and bolted, their hero aspirations temporarily overridden by the primal instinct to survive. Izuku didn't run. He stood in the center of the street, looking up at the metal titan. A psychological obstacle, he mused, designed to test whether a hero will stand their ground in the face of insurmountable odds. A bit heavy-handed, but effective. He was about to turn and walk away, his objective complete, when a faint, desperate cry caught his highly attuned hearing. Ow, my leg! Izuku's head snapped to the right. Through the dust and debris he saw her. The girl from the entrance, Achiko Uraraka. She was pinned beneath a massive slab of concrete that had fallen from a destroyed building. The zero-pointer was advancing slowly, its massive treads crushing everything in its path. In less than 30 seconds, it would roll right over her. Izuku's demeanor shifted. The analytical detachment vanished, replaced instantly by the blazing, incandescent wrath of a true hunter protecting the weak. He didn't think. He executed. Izuku widened his stance, sinking into a low crouch. The asphalt beneath his feet instantly turned to liquid glass under the sudden, terrifying flare of his rin. I need to destroy the target completely to ensure no falling debris crushes her, Izuku calculated in a millisecond. Physical strike. High output. I will combine my aura aegis with a directed emission blast, fueled by One for All. He closed his eyes, tapping into the boundless ocean of power residing in his chest. 5%, Izuku commanded his soul. Any more, and the shockwave will level the entire facility and kill the examinees. Golden-green lightning violently erupted from his body. The sheer, apocalyptic pressure of his aura warped the gravity around him. Loose chunks of concrete and destroyed robot parts began to float into the air, caught in the updraft of his life energy. Uraraka, pinned beneath the rubble, looked up. Her breath hitched. Through the dust, she saw a god wreathed in emerald fire and golden lightning, crouching like a coiled spring. Izuku looked up at the zero-pointer. He released the spring. The street where Izuku had been standing instantly detonated. A crater 40 feet wide and 10 feet deep was carved into the earth simply from the kinetic force of his leap. Izuku broke the sound barrier instantly. A white cone of vapor formed around him as he shot upward like a surface-to-air missile. In the observation room, Aizawa actually stood up from his chair. He's flying. Izuku soared up the front of the colossal machine, easily reaching eye level with the zero-pointer's massive, glowing red optical sensor, over 300 feet in the air. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Izuku pulled his right arm back. The golden-green aura swirled down his arm, condensing into a blinding, hyperdense sphere of energy around his fist. It was a perfect fusion of emission, and 5% of One for All. Smash! Izuku roared, though it was less of a battle cry and more of a release valve for the sheer pressure in his body. He threw the punch. He didn't even physically touch the robot. The energy detonated from his fist, a massive, invisible cylinder of hyperpressurized air and radiant and erupted forward. The beam of kinetic force struck the face of the zero-pointer. The reaction was catastrophic. The 3-foot-thick armor plating didn't dent or crumple. It atomized. The entire upper torso of the colossal machine, thousands of tons of steel, wiring, and engine blocks, was violently, instantly vaporized by the sheer magnitude of the impact. The shockwave continued through the machine, parting the clouds in the sky above UA for miles, leaving a perfectly clear, circular void in the atmosphere. What was left of the zero-pointer, the treads and the lower chassis, simply stopped moving, short-circuited, and collapsed backward, away from Uraraka. A deafening, apocalyptic boom echoed across the entire UA campus seconds after the strike, rattling the windows of the main building. High in the sky, Izuka hung in the air for a moment. He looked at his right arm. The sleeve of his uniform was completely shredded, burned away by the friction of his own punch. But his skin was flawless. His bones were perfectly intact. The aura aegis had flawlessly protected his body from the immense recoil of One for All. Gravity reclaimed him. Izuka began to fall. Normally, a fall from 300 feet would be fatal. But Izuka simply flipped in midair, orienting his feet toward the ground. He channeled his aura into his legs, preparing to use emission as a cushion. As he rapidly approached the earth, he flared a massive burst of green energy downward. The aura hit the ground, acting like an invisible, highly compressed spring. Izuka's momentum was instantly arrested. He landed on the pavement with a soft tap, bending his knees perfectly, not even cracking the concrete. Silence descended upon Battle Center B. The remaining examinees, who had been running for their lives, had stopped and turned around. They were all staring, slack-jawed, at the headless, smoking ruin of the zero-pointer, and then at the boy who had just deleted it from existence with a single, air-pressure punch. Izuka didn't look at them. He walked calmly over to the slab of concrete pinning Uraraka. He didn't use an explosive punch this time. He slipped his fingers under the edge of the ton-heavy slab, engaging his rin, and simply lifted it up with one hand as if it were a piece of cardboard. He tossed it casually to the side. Uraraka stared up at him, her large brown eyes wide with absolute terror and profound awe. The boy wasn't even breathing heavily. His emerald eyes were calm, tranquil pools of immense power. "Are you severely injured?" Izuka asked gently, offering her a hand. My ankle." Uraraka stammered, too shocked to take his hand. You destroyed it, with one punch." "The air, you punched the air. It was an obstacle," Izuka replied simply, as if that explained violating the laws of thermodynamics. "Time is up." Present Mick's voice echoed across the devastated city, sounding significantly more subdued than before. Izuka nodded to himself. He exhaled, letting his aura aegis drop entirely, sinking back into a state of absolute setsu. The terrifying pressure vanished from the air, leaving only the smell of ozone and melted steel. He turned and began to walk toward the exit gates, his shredded right sleeve flapping in the breeze. The examinees parted for him like the Red Sea. They didn't whisper. They didn't point. They just watched him walk, terrified to even breathe too loudly in his presence. In the judge's room, the silence was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. The footage of the zero-pointer's upper half being utterly vaporized looped silently on the main monitor. Finally, Nisa climbed back into his chair. The principal of UA High School, a creature whose intellect surpassed humanity, looked at the screen with a mixture of profound excitement and deep, existential dread. "Eraserhead," Nisa said softly. "You will be the homeroom teacher for Class 1A this year." Aizawa Shota stared at the screen, his hands gripping the fabric of his sleeping bag so hard his knuckles were white. "Yes, Principal. I want you to monitor Izuka Midoriya very, very closely," Nizu instructed, his dark eyes glinting. "Because whatever power that boy wields, it is not a quirk. And if he ever decides he no longer wants to be a hero, I am not entirely sure anyone on this planet could stop him."